What happens when the person who is supposed to love you the most, the person who is supposed to be your safe harbor in the world, is also the source of your deepest pain? What do you do when the price of their love is the complete and total loss of yourself? This is one of the most difficult and terrifying questions a person can face, and it sits at the very heart of Jennette McCurdy's devastating, courageous, and unflinchingly honest memoir, I'm Glad My Mom Died. Now that title is a shock. It's a gut punch. It's meant to be. It's the kind of sentence that society tells us we should never ever think, let alone say out loud. But as you journey through the harrowing landscape of her story, you come to understand that this title is not a statement of simple hate, it's a declaration of freedom. It's the raw, honest, and heartbreaking confession of a woman who had to lose her mother, first to cancer and then to the truth, to finally find herself. This book is far more than a celebrity tell-all about the dark side of childhood stardom. It's a profound and deeply moving case study in the psychology of survival. It's a meticulous documentation of generational trauma, narcissistic abuse, and the gut-wrenching lifelong work it takes to break a cycle of pain and build a life on your own terms, brick by painful brick. To understand Jennette's story, you have to first understand a psychological concept called enmeshment. It's what happens in a family when the boundaries between people become blurry, or disappear entirely. For Jennette, there was no line where her mother, Deborah, ended and she began. They were one entity, and that entity was controlled entirely by Deborah's needs, Deborah's moods, and Deborah's broken dreams. Deborah's lifelong ambition was to be an actress, a dream that was crushed and left to fester. So she did what many parents with unfulfilled dreams do. She projected that ambition onto her only daughter. From the tender age of 6, Jennette's life was no longer her own. It was a mission, a single-minded quest to achieve the stardom her mother never could. Her life became her mother's second chance. This wasn't just about encouraging a child's hobby. This was a complete and total takeover of a human life. Her mother controlled what she ate, what she wore, how she thought, what she felt, and even what she weighed, down to the decimal point. When Jennette was just 11 years old, already anxious about her developing body, she asked her mom how she could stay small, how she could delay puberty so she could get more roles as a child. Her mother, instead of being horrified by this question from her daughter, was delighted. She introduced Jennette to calorie restriction. This was the seed of an eating disorder that would spiral into anorexia and bulimia. It was a disease gifted to her by her mother, wrapped in the language of love and professional necessity. Her childhood became a strange and gilded prison built from her mother's conditional love. She was homeschooled and kept isolated, her only friends being her 3 older brothers. Her mother would perform invasive exams on her breasts and genitals until she was 17 years old, calling it a screening for cancer, but it was an act of profound violation. She insisted on showering with her daughter well into her teens. There was no privacy, no personal space, no room for Jennette to develop an independent thought or a personal identity. Her only job, her only purpose for existing, was to please her mom, to expertly read her volatile moods, to be the perfect, successful, happy little girl that Deborah needed her to be to feel whole. The love she received was entirely transactional. It was a reward for her success in acting and her absolute obedience. To be loved was to disappear. To have a thought of her own was a betrayal. This was the foundation of her entire world. Then, against all odds, the dream came true. Jennette was cast as the tough, sarcastic, food-loving Sam Puckett on the massive Nickelodeon hit show, iCarly. To the outside world, she was a star. She was on TV screens in millions of homes, a confident, hilarious, and beloved character. She was making more money than her parents could have ever imagined, single-handedly supporting her entire family. She had achieved the goal. She had fulfilled her mother's dream, and she had never been more miserable, more terrified, or more alone in her entire life. The character of Sam Puckett was a cruel joke played on Jennette. Sam was everything Jennette wasn't allowed to be. Sam was loud, confident, rebellious, and ate whatever she wanted with joyful abandon. Jennette, behind the scenes, was anxious, pathologically obedient to her mother, and in the grips of full-blown anorexia nervosa. The irony was devastating and constant. While her character was famous for deep-frying sticks of butter, Jennette was secretly subsisting on tiny, precisely measured portions of bland food, her weight obsessively monitored and logged by her mother. She lived in a constant state of hunger and fear. This is a powerful and heartbreaking lesson on the massive difference between external success and internal reality. From the outside, she had it all: fame, money, fans, but on the inside, she was a prisoner of her eating disorder, her mother's suffocating control, and the crushing, relentless pressure to maintain the illusion of a happy, perfect family. After iCarly ended and she transitioned to a new show, her anorexia morphed into bulimia, a chaotic and violent cycle of binging and purging that gave her the illusion of control while her life was spiraling. She was drinking heavily to numb the pain and anxiety, getting into toxic relationships, and all the while, she had to show up to a brightly lit TV set with a smile on her face and pretend to be a happy-go-lucky character for children. The dream, her mother's dream, was a waking nightmare. And the only person she could have turned to for help was the very person who had meticulously built the cage in the first place, and who held the only key. The turning point in Jennette's story is not a happy one. It's a tragedy that becomes a catalyst. Her mother's breast cancer, which had been in remission for years, came back with a vengeance. During her mother's final years, Jennette's life became a desperate, frantic attempt to keep her happy, to keep the peace, to be the perfect, doting daughter. She continued acting, even taking a role in a new show, Sam and Cat, that she hated, all for her mom. She put her entire life, her own health, her own sanity on hold, believing that if she could just be good enough, her mother wouldn't die. When her mother finally passed away, Jennette didn't feel the simple, clean grief that most people do. She felt a confusing, chaotic, and terrifying mess of emotions. She had lost the central organizing principle of her entire life. The person she had spent every waking moment trying to please was gone, and instead of feeling free, she felt completely and utterly lost. This is a crucial insight into trauma. The abuse didn't stop when the abuser was gone, because the abuser's voice was now permanently installed in her own head, a cruel and constant narrator of her every thought. Her eating disorder and her alcoholism got even worse. They were the only coping mechanisms she had. She was a ghost, haunted by her mother's expectations, her mother's judgments, her mother's voice. This is when she finally found a good therapist, after several false starts with professionals who didn't understand the depth of her trauma. And the process of therapy was brutal. It meant looking back at her childhood, not as the happy, loving story she had been conditioned to believe, but as it actually was, a story of abuse, control, coercion, and profound manipulation. This is one of the most important and difficult parts of her journey. Recovery wasn't about simply blaming her mother, it was about differentiating. It was the slow, painful, and deeply disorienting process of trying to untangle her own thoughts, her own feelings, and her own desires from the ones her mother had forced upon her for decades. For the first time in her life at 23 years old, she had to ask herself the most basic and terrifying question in the world: what do I want? And the answer was a deafening silence. She had absolutely no idea. The final part of the book is about the messy, inspiring, and ongoing work of building a self from the ground up, from the ashes of her old life. The first and most terrifying step was to quit acting. Acting was never her dream, it was her mother's. It was the source of her fame and fortune, but it was also the symbol of her imprisonment. To walk away from the money, the security, and the only identity she had ever known was an incredible act of courage. It was her first true, authentic vote for herself. It was the first time she chose her own well-being over the ghost of her mother's approval. She started writing. Writing was the one thing that was truly hers, a skill she had been honing in secret for years. It was a way to process her trauma, to make sense of the chaos, to tell her story in her own words, and even to find dark, sharp humor in the most painful corners of her past. Writing became her path to healing. It was how she began to build a new identity, not as Jennette McCurdy, the actress, the character, but as Jennette McCurdy, the writer, the creator, the survivor. It was the process of taking back the narrative of her own life. I'm Glad My Mom Died is the ultimate result of that journey. The title itself is the final act of defiance. It is her claiming her own story and her own truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes other people. And by the end of the book, you understand what it means. It's not, I'm glad she's gone because I hated her. It's, I'm glad she's gone because her all-consuming presence in my life and then in my head made it impossible for me to live. Her death, while tragic, was the only thing that could set me free to finally, for the first time, even begin to become myself. Her story is a powerful testament to the fact that recovery isn't a neat finish line you cross. It's a lifelong, messy process of learning to parent yourself with the kindness you never received, of learning to trust your own voice after it has been silenced for so long, and of choosing yourself over and over again in small ways every single day. It's a powerful, necessary, and ultimately hopeful story about the incredible strength it takes to break a generational cycle of trauma and finally come home to yourself. This book asks us to look at the uncomfortable truths within our own lives and families. It challenges us to think about what stories we've been told and what stories we need to tell for ourselves. It's a difficult inquiry, but a vital one. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe, and let's continue to explore these important human stories together.